It's official, Canada is no longer building its future for someone else. For generations, our steel, our labor, our innovation were poured into someone else's dream. We built the pipelines that ran through American soil. We forged the steel that framed their cars, their cities, their power. Our factories thrived, but our independence suffered. Now that story is changing. Not slowly. Not quietly. But decisively. In a stunning interview, Industry Minister Mélanie Joly declared what could be the single most transformative economic shift in modern Canadian history, a pivot from steel for America to steel for Canada.
Before moving forward, do subscribe for Parliament updates.
So we're thinking about steel, aluminum, and lumber because we need to support the workers. And at the same time, we're very much aware that we need to strike the right balance. We need to make sure that indeed prices don't go up. And that's going to be the job of the procurement minister to make sure that that's the case. But at the same time, Karen, we're seeing all across the world is heightened protectionism. We're seeing that in the US, we're seeing that in the EU, in Asia as well. And so as these countries themselves are doing their own by, France or by EU policies, we need to be able to react because we need to be able to protect our own workers and our own industries. So that's why we're coming up with that policy.
The message was unmistakable: the age of dependency is ending. For decades, Canadian industry lived under the gravitational pull of Washington. When the US sneezed, we caught the cold. When American tariffs hit, our plants shuddered. The cycle was predictable and painful. But now, for the first time in decades, Ottawa is rewriting the rules. Joly's tone wasn't defiant, it was resolute. Calm, confident, and quietly revolutionary. She spoke about a nation rediscovering its industrial identity. Factories that once bent their production lines to suit the U.S. auto market are now being retooled for Canadian needs, for our bridges, our pipelines, our homes. Think about that. For years, Canadian steel plants in Ontario and Alberta churned out products tailored for Detroit's car industry, while our own infrastructure projects imported materials from elsewhere. Now those same plants are being transformed to serve our economy first. It's not just a shift in production, it's a shift in mindset. Canada is done asking for exemptions, waiting on Washington, or praying for tariff relief. Instead, the government is making U.S. tariffs irrelevant. How? By building a self-sustaining industrial base powerful enough to stand on its own.
Will that be a requirement, and especially for those that are backed by the private sector?
So the problem we have right now in our steel industry is a lot of our steel plants have been developed on a model to serve the U.S. auto market. And the type of steel they develop is not necessarily the type of steel that is required for construction. So while we're coming up with new major projects such as LNG pipelines or things that will require a lot of steel, we need to help our steel plants to pivot and adapt and develop the type of steel, to produce the type of steel that is required. So while that is happening, and I'm working with all the steel plants to do that, and we have a fund to support them at Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie or Dofasco or ArcelorMittal in Hamilton, we will make sure that the proponents of major projects are able to import steel that is linked to what they need while they pivot bit by bit and take Canadian steel. So there will be a transition, but the goal is definitely to support our steel workers and to have the right type of steel for our own domestic market.
The backbone of this transformation lies in a new national strategy, the Buy Canadian policy. A law coming into force this spring that will mandate Canadian steel, Canadian labor, and Canadian design in all major federal projects. From housing and shipbuilding to clean energy and infrastructure, every beam, every bolt, every blueprint will bear the maple leaf. It's a simple yet seismic principle: Canada builds Canada. The impact is already visible on the ground. In Sault Ste. Marie, Hamilton, and Edmonton, steel producers like Algoma Steel, Dofasco, and Sola Metal are retooling production lines once bound to American demand. They're adapting to meet new Canadian specifications, not because they have to, but because they finally can. And this isn't just economic policy, it's national pride forged in metal. For the first time in decades, the federal government isn't chasing access to American markets. It's creating a domestic one, guaranteeing that the demand for Canadian steel comes from Canadian growth. That means more jobs at home, fewer vulnerabilities abroad, and a future that no tariff or foreign policy tantrum can threaten. Joly described the feeling perfectly. She said it's as if everyone now has the maple leaf tattooed on their heart. Because this isn't about isolation, it's about insulation, building a nation strong enough to weather any global storm. Protectionism isn't new. The US does it. The EU does it. Asia does it. But for years Canada played the polite partner, open, compliant, and endlessly patient. Now it's playing the strategic one. Trump's return to the White House reignited old fears in Ottawa. Another wave of tariffs, another fight over steel and autos, another year of economic whiplash. But instead of begging for stability, Carney's government is manufacturing it. Literally. Every ton of steel produced for a Canadian pipeline means one less ton dependent on American approval. Every ship built with Canadian material in Halifax or Vancouver means one less concession to foreign supply chains. It's a message to Washington without ever saying a word: we no longer need your permission to prosper. This pivot isn't without its challenges. Many steel plants still produce grades suited for U.S. auto manufacturing, not for Canadian infrastructure. Retooling takes time and costs money. But Ottawa isn't leaving industry to handle it alone. The government is investing billions to modernize facilities, train workers, and align production with national priorities. That partnership between government and industry, once seen as bureaucratic, is now the engine of transformation. Major players like ATCO and Al Steel are collaborating directly with Ottawa to synchronize output with the surge in infrastructure projects under the Build Canada Homes initiative. And it's not just about homes. It's about energy independence, about defense, about national resilience. Canadian shipyards that once sourced American steel are now proudly building with domestic material. Every hull, every weld, every piece of armor now tells a story, not of dependency, but of sovereignty. For decades, Canadian taxpayers helped American-owned companies survive crises, from the auto bailouts of 2008 to the trade wars that followed. This time, the message from Ottawa is clear: we'll support you, but you'll build for us. That's not confrontation. It's evolution. And behind it all stands the architect of Canada's new economic identity, Prime Minister Mark Carney. A former central banker turned visionary statesman, Carney's leadership complements Joly's industrial strategy perfectly. Together they're executing a master plan, transforming Trump's protectionism into Canada's propulsion.
So I'm very much aware that U.S. tariffs are having an impact on the auto sector. You know, nobody is surprised by this.
Yeah, of course.
But what I'm saying to GM and Stellantis is we have a fund to support you. We have a way to get through this. And by the way, we were there in 2008 and 2009. We took stakes in your company. We Canadians made sure that you would be able to get through this. And a lot of Canadian taxpayers' money was involved. Now, it's time for you to be there for Canadians.
What once threatened to weaken Canada's economy has now become the catalyst for its rebirth. Trump's tariffs pushed Canada to the edge, and instead of falling, it learned to fly. Carney and Joly's vision is built on a powerful idea: true independence isn't declared, it's manufactured. Factories, not speeches, define sovereignty. And for the first time in modern history, Canada's factories are producing not for approval, but for purpose. This is the rebirth of industrial Canada, confident, ambitious, and proudly self-reliant. A country that's finally done building America's future, because it's too busy building its own. The shift that Mélanie Joly outlined isn't just policy, it's rebellion dressed in diplomacy. And it's happening right under Washington's nose. For years, Canada was the junior partner in the North American economy, dependable, polite, and predictable. But that dynamic is dissolving fast. Behind closed doors, Carney's economic team calls it the Quiet Revolution 2.0, a deliberate, strategic decoupling from U.S. dependence without slamming the door shut. The idea is simple: you can't be bullied by an economy that no longer controls your fate. Trump's tariffs. Let them come. The irony is that his protectionism, meant to choke Canadian industry, is now fueling its independence. Every time the US raises a wall, Canada learns to build a bridge over it. Carney's Buy Canadian policy, the Build Canada Homes program, and the National Reindustrialization Fund together form what some economists are calling a trillion-dollar firewall around Canada's economy. Not to isolate it, but to protect it from volatility that used to come with every US election. And you can already feel the ripple effects. In Alberta, newly reopened fabrication plants are rehiring laid-off steelworkers, men and women who thought their trades had no future. In Hamilton, production lines are humming again, but this time for Canadian infrastructure contracts. These aren't one-off projects, they're part of a national blueprint to make Made in Canada more than a slogan. Investors, once skeptical, are now calling this the Canadian decade. Because for the first time in living memory, Ottawa isn't reacting to Washington, it's dictating its own tempo. This transformation is economic, yes, but it's also political theater at its finest. Every ton of steel poured in a Canadian mill, every home built under the Build Canada program, is a silent vote of confidence in Carney's leadership. And the symbolism isn't lost on anyone, especially not in Washington. When Joly said, Canada is no longer waiting for exemptions, she wasn't just talking about trade. She was talking about identity. About no longer asking permission to lead. About reclaiming the industrial heartbeat that once defined this country. Across the border, Trump's advisors have reportedly taken notice. The Canadian pivot, though non-confrontational, is beginning to sting where it hurts: influence. For decades, U.S. administrations counted on Canada's economic alignment to soften every trade negotiation. Not anymore. Carney's approach flips that playbook. Instead of fighting America's protectionism, he's rendering it obsolete. If the U.S. builds a tariff wall, Canada builds a domestic supply chain. If the U.S. raises prices, Canada subsidizes local production. If Washington flexes, Ottawa fortifies. And in doing so, Carney is achieving something rare in politics: strength without swagger, independence without isolation. The global landscape is watching, too. European and Asian analysts are calling Canada's model a blueprint for middle power resilience, a way for nations caught between global giants to thrive on their own terms. It's not about cutting ties, it's about cutting strings. And nowhere is this more visible than in the defense sector. Canadian shipyards in Halifax and Vancouver are no longer outsourcing their core materials. They're building fleets with Canadian steel, Canadian crews, and Canadian pride. Every vessel launched now doubles as a statement: the maple leaf is not just flying, it's forging. Even automakers are realigning. After years of lobbying for U.S. concessions, companies like GM and Stellantis are quietly pivoting their production models to meet Canadian demands. Because when the domestic market becomes this strong, you can't afford to ignore it. And behind the economics lies a story of national rediscovery, of workers who finally feel like their labor is serving their country. Welders, engineers, shipbuilders, and mill operators, people who for decades built for others, are now building for home. That sense of ownership, of belonging, is spreading like wildfire. Ask anyone inside the industry, there's a new energy pulsing through the factories. A quiet pride, a confidence that Canada can not only compete globally but lead. Not by being bigger but by being smarter, more sustainable, and unshakably self-reliant. And make no mistake, Carney's economic revolution is far from over. The Buy Canadian law is just the first domino. Next comes the National Infrastructure Sovereignty Act, a sweeping policy that will tie federal funding to domestic material use across energy, construction, and defense. It's a long game. And it's one that could redefine what it means to be Canadian in the 21st century. Because sovereignty isn't just borders, it's the ability to build what you need, when you need it, without waiting for someone else's approval. As the dust settles, one truth is becoming clear: the old Canada, the quiet neighbor that built for America, is gone. In its place stands a nation no longer waiting for the world to notice. It's forging its destiny, one beam, one ship, one policy at a time. And this time, the steel has the maple leaf stamped right into it.
Canada debates.